Thank you so much. Got it. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. And thanks to the Red Wheelbarrow for allowing me to share my poetry with you. I'll be reading mostly from my fourth collection this evening, and it's titled Small Souls. And I'll also be reading from a number of unpublished poems that I've been working on. So you'll get an inkling and an idea of what I'm working on currently. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to try and read poems that I don't often read in actual readings, face-to-face readings. And I'm going to start with a poem titled A Clock Ticks Beside the Immensity of the Universe. And this is from my new collection, Small Souls. It's a collection of new and collected poems that's published by Caravan Press. Here goes. What lives within the heart of this absurdity, this coming and going of breath, as our clocks tick beside the immensity of the universe? A fly contemplates its fate on a dishcloth. The dinner plates glisten in silent chaos, and the aluminium sink always gleams in wonder. Sometimes, when the house is carried away by a black sea of wind, I hear her leaving. A door aches half shut. Then there's the drip of footsteps over the floorboards that somehow always forget to evaporate to the passing years. If at any point someone has a question, we can take it. I'm happy to take questions. I'm hoping to keep it as informal as possible. The next poem is titled The Song of a Bullet. The song of a bullet cares little for its instrument and nothing for its composer. It knows only the sound of its own voice whispering through the space towards a target. The song of a bullet is written in the key of muscle ripping, of bone, stone, and bark splintering, and faint expulsion of last breath. The song of a bullet is also the song of the hunter, soldier, and the gangster. As a nail is the child of a hammer, a bullet is the love child of a gun. One day, a man told me he had shot 200 birds. Another told me he had machine gunned 200 Cubans crossing a donga. A gangster explained some bullets write their own songs. They are like stray dogs roaming a bad neighborhood. They are proud of their arrangements and the unique notes of their compositions, arcing tracer, stitching across a night sky, the way a buck flinches in surprise and then spins in earnest as if trying to cast off death. They told me it was a spiritual moment, a necessary final verse for the many hymns of their bullets. And then a short poem titled Beneath a Streetlight. A banished angel huddles beneath a fizzling streetlight, his clipped wings tucked under a greatcoat, eyes shadowed by the brim of a fedora. The wind turns on him. A gust lifts the lapel of his coat. It flutters against his neck and reminds him of flight. And then a number of my poems are prose poems, and I will be reading a few prose poems tonight. The first one I'm reading is titled The Ward. It was for my wife, Julie. Before dawn, when a blanket is woven from the blue chill and light of long dead galaxies, time's membrane thins, and a doctor imagines the dream whispers of her patients. Branches scratch their pleas against the roof and brickwork of the hospital. All is quiet, except for the click and hiss of respirators in a world where the lung has lost its power. In a corner bed, an old man curves to the shape of an invisible womb, made infant again. His dream has returned breath to the body of his wife. He feels her warmth, the rise and fall of hope as he treads water in that cold black sea between sleep and death. He wakes to the first disintegrations of darkness, the sound of a television, the rising rattle of a breakfast trolley and smell of porridge. At the far end of the ward's sheen, a doctor yawns and swipes a screen, scanning for rumors of hope and far off miracles, but nothing is offered. And then I'm going to read two poems from a longer sequence of poems. It's titled Short Histories of Dust, Love, and War. A short history of dust. All the words between us are made of dust, which in turn attracts more dust. Unseen, this memory clothes us until the first drops of rain begins to fall. Then, a short history of children. In those hours when the house orbits darkness and my wife sleeps, her body cupped against the clock, I visit the rooms of my children and remove the batteries from their bedroom clocks. So for a moment, time loses its footing and stumbles over that sudden pause. And then a short history of war. My war became my son's war, like my father's war became my war. Now it too courses under my son's skin, corpuscles of half-scrubbed memories, until that ache in the blood catches in the hearts of his children. And then while talking about my son, here is a poem titled Poem for a Son Leaving Home. The room still carries his climate, its untidiness, a damp towel, and a single sock that will never be paired again. There are those that say this is good for him, the way people always say things. Each to his own alphabet, each to his own God, or unbelieving. Yet another book has just opened in the language I am trying to learn, with its grammar of vacancy, the fluency of a perfectly made bed. There is no stopping this. Now, in its silence, the room is paused, awaiting his return, followed by laughter and used bedding. Before breakfast, I run my fingers over a scattering of grief, spilt sugar on a wooden table catching the morning sun. And then a poem that I was asked to read, and if David is here, this poem is for David. It's titled The Thief. There was his thuggish desk, its pine weight and rivers of wood grain running beneath last year's exam papers, roughed up textbooks and snapped rulers. In the corner of his office, a basket of canes awaited selection. Above it, a certificate, and then a single frosted window that looked out onto the quad, censoring the view, yet open far enough so I could see welts of cloud over blue, and he could hear the conversations of teenage girls. 2 deflated rugby balls shared a shelf above his desk, stacked with more papers in manila folders. An empty photo frame, books about discipline and the minds of children. And his deformed pinky, the way it defied the other fingers of his hand, how difficult it must be to catch a rugby ball or steady a ballpoint. He'd accused me of stealing exercise books and sent me to his office to await a caning at the end of class. I waited for the coming fright of the bell, wondering, would I be allowed to choose a cane from the wicker basket, or what had happened to the stolen books? I can't remember if he caned me. I do remember the cherry flush of his cheeks and fine deltas of veins, like the petrified flows of Mars that spread towards the shave lines of his jaw, and how he put me in the A team when I tackled Neil Parker. I'm then going to move to an earlier collection. I'm just watching the time carefully, and I would like to read a poem. I just need to find it. I've lost my place, forgive me. It's titled Firestorm, and it's a fairly controversial poem because it deals with the firebombing by the Allied forces of Germany, in particular Dresden. A breeze slips over suburbia, chooses a garden, and fans the flames of greenery, whispering secrets in the dialects of youth. I call to my children, words splash just beyond their play, spilling on the edges of the garden, pooling near a tool shed. I walk over and for no reason shoulder the door open. The interior is a trap of oxides and must. Shelves skewed by mass and age carry clouded jars containing nails, bolts, nuts, and evaporated histories. A vase clutches a fan of petrified brushes, and below it the innards of a power tool are arranged in 3 piles over an oil stain. In the far corner, a mower is bound to the dank with electrical cord. Its underbelly is caked with yellow wads of grass, and here too, its stone-chipped skin is fumed in oil dust. I pry open a paint tin and poke at its rubbery dermis with a screwdriver. A half-light has crept over a summer long past. Everything is comatose, like a country that has crumbled under the weight of its own history and heat. After a 3-day bombing raid on Dresden in 1945, some of the corpses were so brittle that flesh crumbled into clouds of ash. Huddles of children and whole families melted together in the firestorm. Outside, my children are laughing, ignoring my wife's call to lunch, relishing rebellion. Her words are becoming ash. Motes of her voice drift in the rules of light below the shed's roof. What is it that clots detail but spurs pain? I leave the shed and the rows of dead on the streets of Dresden. The door objects, and as I close it behind me, for a moment it sounds like God clearing his throat. I'm now going to move to a number of unpublished poems, and a number of these poems are my response to the invasion of Ukraine. As many know, I often deal with issues of human conflict and war in my poetry. So a number of these poems are related to the Ukrainian conflict, and others not. The first poem I'd like to read is titled Militia. Before sleep, her blue thoughts would draw strength from the swaying pines cast across the ceiling of their bedroom. In time, her thoughts became a muddied snowball that gathered momentum and grew to a small planet that hurtled into a valley of lush oblivion. A planet of prayer sculpted from ice and worry conjured from gravel, that careened into the same valley where her lover was ambushed by a pharmacist who, up until 10 days ago, had never squeezed a trigger. And then a poem titled Everything is Bracketed by the Fragility of Breath. Life sheets by as we perform a dance to a song of our own making. The floorboards creak under the weight of the dancer. We are no more than petals loosened by late summer as a far-off gale gathers destruction and dust is poured over our dreams. Yet, at times, light pierces the mystery and becomes an involuntary gesture of the dreamer, like the warm weight of a body turning towards you in sleep. This is life enough. Watching starlight cast into the ocean, or a gardener shovels soil to reveal the hidden world of the writhing earthworm and other unnamed creatures, of life turning in on itself and asking to be part of the composition. Those rare encounters, a moment's gaze between an animal and oneself, a keyhole through which you glimpse the connectedness of every atom. In that fraction, an unfathomable code is deciphered and then lost. Everything is bracketed by the fragility of breath. This is perhaps where God lingers, tending his allotment on the rim of a derelict galaxy, planting, watering, and weeding. Decades back, while walking on a pearled beach, the wind's knife cut the future into many paths, yet you chose one. In the end, every journey becomes an incomplete puzzle of wonder, an ode to chance, where the final piece is tossed away to celebrate imperfection. And then you feel it, the immense improbability of this one life. And then a prose poem titled Becoming Both Flesh and Water. Day pens a letter of sunlight and tide written over the sand flats on slicks of glinted translucency. The moment sharpens to shifts of knee-high surf mist, loitering at that juncture where the ocean meets a godlike radiance. She launches herself into the freshness, into an oily calm, shattering her body into shards of petroleum light. Stroking from the island shorewards, aiming for the lines of surf churning the shallows. Here and there, silhouettes of walkers and runners are starting their day, trailing footprints into a distance fused to sketches of gulls. There is the wet flash of a hooked arm, stroking deep into the rise and dip of swell, pulling herself shorewards, unawares. A tern rides the updraft of a cresting wave, breaks, and is plucked to altitude by an invisible hand as the wave feathers and detonates, bounding and bouncing smaller explosions of foam beachwards. What are her thoughts? Eyes open, yet stinging, mesmerized by billions of particles of sand and grit suspended in green mystery. Just a head's turn from each breath, a blurred immensity revealing a shoal of bait fish or a silvered flash of a mermaid's tail. And perhaps she senses that chunk of shadow beneath her sheened body. What's certain, those fantails of cirrus brushed across the slow burn of the dawn sky are beautiful. Further down the beach, within a box of shadow cast by the hotel, a dog slaps a tangle of kelp against the sand, whipping the imagined life out of it against a fish-gray shoreline. And that is when they hear the red scream of her becoming both water and flesh. And I think we've got time for maybe 2 more poems, if that's okay.
Yes, that is completely fine.
I'm going to read a fairly long poem then. It's titled, Bless Me, Babushka, for I've sinned. Bless me, Babushka, for I've sinned. I should have refused my oversized fatigues, my webbing, and the ragged flag that argues with this foreign wind outside our tank. I answered the call among many, like our short-sighted driver, Sergei, and Nikolai, the son of a baker who now loads shells instead of bread. Bless me, Babushka, for I do not know why we commit these sins or how this special operation benefits our nation, but know this for sure, that I've forsaken your womb for a steel tomb, heading on a final vector towards my end. We passed the bones of yet another village, and I thought I smelt the scent of your herb garden in Uncle Anatoly's allotment, near that children's park, the one with the broken swings and lopsided roundabout. waiting to unleash our great inventions on us, the Kalashnikov and Molotov cocktail, with great vengeance. Bless me, babushka, for today the sun gleams like a divine coin tossed up into nice blue sky. We are happy. Some are singing. Lieutenant Babin promised us a warm meal this evening. There's even talk of peleme for dinner and some drink to wash it down. Perhaps Sergei's phone will find a signal, and if so, I will send you this letter via telegram. Bless me, babushka, for I'm alive. We took a hit. Sergei and Nikolai did not make it out in time. Lieutenant Babin disappeared like breath on a mirror. I was standing on the turret, about to take a piss as the missile struck our machine. Bless you, babushka, bless you again and again, for it was your blessings that threw me clear of the blast and all the way back into your arms. I don't know if we've got time for one more. I'm sure you've heard enough poetry for this evening. If you would like me to read another poem or would like me to answer some questions, I'd be happy to do that.
All right, Stephen, thank you so much. Can everybody unmute and we can give Stephen a round of applause? Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I love prose poems. I think they allow you to do so much more that you can't. What am I saying? I mean, I love prose poems because they allow you so much more. Like they're almost like flash fiction, but they're also not. They allow you to do more with rhythm, I believe. So I really thoroughly enjoyed myself listening to you. I could listen to you even longer. Are there any questions in the room? Any comments, any questions for Stephen? Jacques, the floor is yours.
I may be wrong, but I think that Stephen wanted to read one more poem, if there's time. But I do also have a question. So Stephen, that was a gorgeous reading. And I was really struck by the way you write about time, about things that are irretrievable, the bomb already dropped, the bullet already fired, the sugar spilt on the table. And I was very moved by that image of you removing the batteries from the children's watches, because that's an image where for a moment, you seem to be stopping time, I don't know if for me, that felt like a hinge into everything that you read tonight. I don't know if you'd like to say something about that and whether that rings true or resonates.
I think, your take on the poem about me removing the batteries from one of my kids' clock radios is really an attempt, I suppose, a very futile attempt on my part to pause time and freeze that particular moment and really observe it and appreciate it, because ultimately, we only have the present, but it's an illusion itself. It's fleeting, and it's never there really. So yes, time does play an important role in my writing. I suppose historical time, cosmological time, and then quotidian time, the time of the ordinary, the time of living in suburbia and raising a family and going about one's work and paying one's bills and responsibilities. So I do think different elements of time do creep into my writing. And the difficulty, of course, is that one needs to constantly prevent oneself from slipping into sentimentality or into a sense of nostalgia or nostalgic space, where which I don't think in some instances is altogether bad. But when it becomes a dominating aspect of your writing, it becomes, I suppose, quite dangerous. But in small doses, it works. But yes, I think time does play a vitally important role in my writing.
Do you think of poems as attempts to sort of stop time, slow it down?
Yeah, I think poems ultimately alter our perception of time, really, as does good music or any of the creative arts. It really allows us to take a few steps back and from time and really examine our presence in this illusion, this thing we call time. I think poetry, I mean, it's not, I don't think, as successful as music at really coming to grips with elements of time, particularly when, you know, those elements of nostalgia and of trying to recall, you know, lost moments. But it gets close. I think it gets close.
Yes, Stephen, we have Makosi who has her hand up. Makosi, the floor is yours.
Hi, Makosi.
Hi, Stephen. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Great reading. I also just agree with the previous comment that the way you write, it's like it captures the moment so well that as if also myself, I can start imagining or seeing what you're talking about. But another thing that I just wanted to say, to compliment really, I just love how you write about your wife. It's really, I mean, we get to also to know you as a poet a bit in your personal life, just a bit in your writing. So I think that's really great.
Thanks, Makosi. I appreciate that. It's difficult not to, you know, I try and write about what I know and what I've experienced. On the rare occasion, I do venture beyond that. But, you know, those who are close to you inevitably infiltrate your writing, which is, you know, it's part of the lived experience, my lived experience. Any other questions?
Yes, there are a few other questions. I think Jacques has a follow-up, and then we have a question from Deborah.
Okay.
So
No,
Jacques,
I think that was an old hand.
okay, cool. Deborah, the floor is yours. Deborah.
Hi, Stephen. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi,
Thank
Deborah.
you so much. Yeah, so I was listening to all the references about time and the images of consequences across generations. That was something that I picked up, and so I was particularly struck by the visual imagery that you use to communicate about time. And there was one very powerful phrase: "Wind's knife cut the future into many parts." So there's a lot of imagery and symbolism in some of the poems that you've read. I just wanted to know a bit more about, do those images come to you when you are contemplating thoughts around time, or do you create imagery to express the thoughts?
That's a tough question. I think it really is. You know, the poems come to me in fragments, and then I will attempt to assemble them. But ultimately, I'm not, I wouldn't say conscious of attempting to work with time when I'm busy on a poem or poems. But I do think that, you know, that my sense of time is pretty fluid, and I enjoy toying with time, particularly my short fiction. I often employ interesting sweeps across different time periods, but I don't consciously say, okay, you know, I'm focusing on time at this particular point in a poem. It really is. It's pretty spontaneous, I think, in terms of my creative process. I don't think I've answered your question very well, but I think, yeah, ultimately it's more spontaneous than it is planned or contrived.
Thank you, Stephen. Ed, the floor is yours.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi there, Ed. How are you?
Good, yourself?
I'm well, thank you. Excuse the cat.
No, the cat's great. I love the cat. Yeah, just comments, observations. I'm always aware when I hear your poems of the precision of the imagery and the way the imagery is often very startling. I mean, I think of the bed. Is it the bed with its grammar vacancy?
Yes, I think fluency of vacancy, something like that. Yeah.
But it's, I mean, any number of examples. And your writing, as one listener, one reader, it returns me to mystery and to complexity, the complexity and the mystery of being alive, essentially. So just appreciation for that. And
Oh, thank you.
yeah, if I have a question, there may be two questions. The one possibly is connected to the way that Bless Me Babushka, that poem, the way that
Yes.
You find a vantage point to talk about ideology, religion, intimacy. It's just very effective for me. And the same with the garden and the bombing of Dresden, the way you blur the boundaries between things, and the listener or the reader sort of has to locate where they are in all of this, well, what they identify with, what they don't. So how do you navigate that territory? Is that just something which you find it easy to go there, or is it you're just drawn to it and it takes its own course?
Yeah. I think, you know, in for example, the poem about Dresden, you know, massive historical events are obviously lost, and the eventually the power of those events, and it dissipates over time. So I do think, you know, in my writing, what I do tend to do is try and draw those momentous historical events into the present, and tie them into the everyone's everyday lives and the quotidian and our ordinary lives, and how those events are essentially the histories of those events, particularly in South Africa, our history, how it intersects and influences and affects the way in which we live our lives. So I suppose, and you know, the same holds true for the poem Bless Me Babushka, which really is a there are a number of narratives that I've pulled together from both historical sources and from anecdotes I've picked up on, and people I've spoken to who've been in the Ukraine and in some cases fighting. So yeah, I think it's interesting in that I try and not necessarily toy with history, but bring or at least gently shift histories into the present and pose questions around that, which I think is incredibly important. In that, and that is why, of course, we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, because we don't take heed of our sins, our historical sins.
No, it's powerful the way you do bring it back to the everyday, and that there's enough room for those questions to linger. You're not getting something didactic or moralizing.
Yeah, I mean, the poem around Dresden was particularly controversial. It was considered too shocking for some reason to be published locally, but yeah, I mean, that's how things go. But and I think it's important, as I said, that we are aware of these events and the aftershocks of them.
So my other question is a gentler question. I hope it's not it's just to do with form, and I'm intrigued by what you do on the page with text, and whether it's a prose poem or whether it's things which are more like waves across a page. I noticed that some of the poems tied to the sea, I like that. Is that connected to the rhythm of reading, to breath, and what informs that sort of thing? I'm just curious.
I think there are a number of things that come into play. Firstly, the influence of particular forms of poetry. For example, Black Mountain School and poets like Charles Olson, who really began to experiment with the way in which poetry appeared visually on the page, and the way in which that was intimately connected to the way the poem was read, whether silently or loud by the reader or the poet themselves. So there's that, and of course, part of one of my day jobs, I'm a graphic designer, so the visual elements of printed poetry on the page is also important, and how that links to the rhythm of the poem and the form of the poem and the soul of the poem, and I suppose, on one level, I was asked a similar question, and I said that I'd like to think my poetry operates on two levels. There's a surface, or I suppose epidermic level to my poetry. It's accessible and you can read it and understand it to a certain degree. And there's a more cryptic and a latent or cryptic aspect to my writing. And my work sort of moves between the two, but essentially I'd like to think that my poems require more than one reading. And in the second reading or the third reading, one begins to see other things. And ultimately, by working with the visual elements of poetry on the printed page, on the page itself, interesting things start to happen, and one begins to see interesting relationships between the words, the meaning of the words, and how they appear on the page.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was so insightful and gave me a lot to think about. I thought a lot about, when I was doing my master's, I thought a lot about nostalgia and how it's used in writing and memory. So listening to all the conversations that have just happened, it's just given me a lot more to think about. Thank you so much for this. It's been great having you. Can we please give Stephen another round of applause, a huge round of applause? Unmuted.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording.